Maybe you like going hiking and exploring in the deep woods and you encounter something truly terrifying. Maybe you live so far out of the way that the woodline near your house is a thin divide between home and horror. Today's stories feature such situations. People who live near or venture into the darkest parts of the woods and end up discovering something sinister, or something sinister discovers them. Enjoy these allegedly true and scary stories. And be sure to send me your true stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them in the future. Also, check out eeriecast.com for more creepy podcasts like this. Now, let's begin. I don't think that's a coyote. From DragonSoul. I think there's something living in the national forest up the road from my home that isn't a normal animal. I recently moved states about 2 months back, buying a home that sits in a small neighborhood on the side of a mountain that's just outside a national forest. For the sake of privacy, I won't mention which. Because of this, we often get wildlife wandering through our yards, mostly deer, elk, and skunks. I've got 4 horses of my own that live on the property with me and my family, and seeing as they are trail horses, they don't generally spook at wildlife. In fact, my 4-month-old filly is friends with the deer herd that wanders through. I say this to let you know that they aren't spooked by normal animals going through, which will make later events more strange. When we first moved in, we found a half-decayed deer carcass hidden away up a hill in front of our driveway. Which is weird because this is a neighborhood with people coming and going, so why would a predator decide to eat here? And as far as I know, none of my neighbors are active hunters. Even so, I doubt they'd just leave a carcass there if they'd killed it. There were no prints we could find, nor evidence of another animal, so we kind of just left it alone and moved on. Maybe whatever was eating it had gotten spooked and dropped it to run. For a while, everything was pretty normal. Though nights there did seem to hold a certain air of danger, more so than when I'd go camping or playing outside at night at my grandparents', who also lived on a mountainside, surrounded by forest. It feels like something is always just outside of our porch lights, watching us. Maybe I'm just paranoid because of the bears and cougars that are known to be in the forest. Still, I just don't like being outside at night here. Over the course of a month, my family had hiked up and down the mountainside by the main road to get to some of the small shops in the area and to take in our new home. Along the way up, we found multiple dead animals. Cats, skunks, a deer, and even half an elk. It was so strange to see so much of this in a stretch of path, but then again it could have all just been roadkill. But why was it all in that one spot, I'm not sure. Why so many animals were dying in this area altogether was just strange. There was also no gore in the road that I could see, so it makes me think they weren't hit there or killed there. Perhaps they were just dumped off by whoever cleans the road. Seemed like a logical thought at the time. Now, though, I'm not so sure. In my neighborhood, there were 4 roosters who just kind of went where they wanted. No one owned them, so they would wander from house to house looking for the small bits of food people would throw out to them. Often you would hear them crowing rather loudly in the mornings and afternoons. This went on as usual for several weeks, until a few days ago. Suddenly, there was no more crowing, and the chickens stopped wandering the yards. I hadn't really paid it any mind until one of my neighbors stopped to chat on my way to work. They were in the process of trying to catch one of the feral roosters when she told me that the other 3 had been found dead. They were completely drained of blood, but not eaten. This immediately struck me as odd because what kind of animal does that? Certainly not big cats or coyotes. They would have eaten the bodies, torn them apart. I don't think it was the local cats either, as none of them have ever shown interest in bothering them. Plus, I don't think they would drain blood like that. Of course, the first thing to come to mind was a chupacabra. I am in an area where there have been many supposed chupacabra sightings over the years, and no normal animal would do that. I was curious for the better part of the day, but ultimately moved on with my day. Until midnight, close to 1 a.m. That's when I suddenly heard this screaming howl outside the window. It sounded like it was coming from across the road and down the mountain a ways. It was weird. The first half of it was this unsettling, piercing scream. Then it slowly devolved into a howl that sounded close to a coyote, but something still sounded off about it. I'm not quite sure how to explain, but I felt tense and nervous listening to it. It was like I finally found the reason why I always felt unease outside here at night, and I wasn't the only one. My horses, who usually don't give a crap about that sort of stuff, were snorting and running along the fence line farthest from where the sound came. As I mentioned before, this was highly unusual for them. I mean, my eldest mare faced down bull moose before, and I mean face to face with barely even a startle, and rounded up cattle in the pouring rain and thunder. So what could it have been that was making even her so unsettled from that far away? Thankfully, nothing else happened that night, aside from the howling. So far, I haven't heard of any more dead animals, and the howls have yet to return. Still, I do not know what it was, and it still doesn't sit right with me. Another thought is that perhaps maybe it was a skinwalker, or something close to it. I can't be certain, but whatever it is, I hope it stays away and just leaves us alone. Creepy camp figure. From May. About 2 weeks ago, I was at work as a sleepaway counselor in Oregon. Here's a little bit of the layout of the land. We have many locations around Washington, Oregon, California, and Colorado. This happened in the middle of Oregon. We have 2 different camping locations there about 20 minutes apart. This particular event happened at a location called Breck. This property is around 200 acres with woods that stretch for many miles with huge grass fields. We called the main area the Pavilion Village. We have an old worn-down bathroom house that we use for storage, a working bathroom as well, a working outdoor kitchen, 4 or maybe 5 porta potties on a paved platform, and an old worn-down chimney that we used to use as a blacksmithing forge. Next to that is a 15-foot rock wall. Down the path from that is a few wood chip spots made for setting up tents and playing games. There are a few other paths that lead to the road where we keep buses and vans, and another path that leads to a place called the Witch's Hut. Now, the Witch's Hut has quite a backstory. 20, maybe 25 years ago, there's said to be an old witch who lived in the Witch's Hut who would sell potions to campers and counselors in exchange for them doing tasks. One day, the witch mysteriously disappeared, and everyone claims she was taken by monsters. The legend claims that she cast a curse on the hut before she disappeared. It is said that if anyone touches the hut, the curse would turn them into a fern living on the roof. Pretty creepy, right? The day this happened, we had been hearing blood-curdling screams all week. We assumed, or rather hoped, it was one of the Realms kids who do LARPs. We thought maybe they had a whistle that they were blowing, or that it was just kids playing games and screaming. But no one really knew where it was coming from. This happened on the last night of camp. The group I was counseling had put away their tents so they weren't wet in the morning, and everyone was cowboy camping, which is sleeping under the stars with a sleeping bag and pillow. A few counselors had told me that they were talking way past quiet hours, which starts at 9 p.m., 10 p.m. for the high schoolers, and ended at 7 a.m. So I'd gone in to check on them, and everyone was asleep. At camp, we have a strict rule that at night you can only use red light headlamps so you don't wake everyone up. At that point, I glanced over at the rock wall, and when I did, I saw these 2 red lights pointing right at the campers who were sleeping. The odd thing was, they were at the same height as me, and suddenly they began looking right at me. I took a step to walk over there, and the lights went behind the rock wall. I walked over to where the porta potties were because I saw a light there too, and I assumed it was a camper using the bathroom. When I got there, I didn't find anyone else standing outside. Now, we have a strict buddy system, especially at night. So if there was a kid in the porta potty, I expected to see someone outside waiting for them. After knocking on the door, I realized it was a counselor. I then asked if they'd been shining the red light at the campers in the field. They said they'd been in the bathroom the whole time. So I waited for them to get out so we could walk back to my car and grab my hatchet and flashlight, plus a few more counselors to join us in the investigation. After we got those counselors and some things, we walked back over to the porta potties. At that point, there were maybe 10 of us. We split up into groups and made a lap around Breck to see if we could find any trespassers. However, we didn't find anything out of place. After that, we all walked back to the cars. We were discussing what it could have been. Now I should mention here that the spot we camped at was located on old tribal land and cult land. The counselor that I was with was scared to walk back to the campers they were watching, so we walked the quarter-mile back together. Our flashlights were pointed ahead of us, and we soon came upon a reflective sign. It was glowing from the light. Suddenly, I saw a figure glide right in front of the sign. The two of us just stood there. The figure stopped, then turned to face us. I saw two glowing red eyes looking right back at us. I took a step forward to the figure. It then darted away, so we walked over to the sign. We looked at the mud right under the sign and there were human-sized footprints. We kept on following the footsteps, and soon it led us right to the witch's hut. There, we heard a crunching sound and things falling in and around the hut. We ran across the path and back over to the other counselors. We gathered everyone from before, and then we came back to the witch's hut. We made a full loop in and out of the hut, but we didn't find anything. It didn't seem like anything had been touched. Nothing fell, nothing had been moved. We were confused. After a while, we walked back to the kids in the field. As we did, we heard this ear-piercing screech mixed with screaming coming from the witch's hut. A few seconds later after that, there was a distorted growl. I swear it spoke a word. Leave. We had never run so fast as we escaped back to the field. We checked on the kids. By then, everyone was awake and terrified. We had to explain to everyone that something was in the woods, and nobody felt safe anymore. We were forced to pack everyone in the bus. We drove 20 minutes down the path. Keep in mind, this was around 11:30 p.m. We then unloaded everyone out of the buses. Now that we were at the other location, we gathered up the counselors there, whether they were sleeping or awake at that point. They told us that nothing weird had been happening there, but they'd also been hearing screaming all week before that. To this day, we still can't figure out what had been happening. We don't know what it was, but if you have any clue, please don't hesitate to let me know. The Whistle. From Born to Be Wild. This particular story was back in 2014. It happened down in Thompson, Connecticut, bordering Webster, Massachusetts. I lived there with my now ex-girlfriend, completely surrounded by thick but beautiful woods. From my understanding, this area has a lot of history. There are these rock walls there too, and nobody knows who built them. Occasionally, you will come across active cornfields, and you'll see all kinds of wildlife, including a lot of deer, and you'll hear packs of coyotes going crazy almost every other night. Originally, I'm from Haines, Alaska, so I'm no stranger to the outdoors and wildlife, and I've always been really big into outdoor survival, primitive fire making, trap building, shelter building, and all that. I've spent and still spend a lot of time in the woods. To be honest, I feel safer walking right through the middle of the woods than I do walking on the side of the road, despite all the things I've experienced. At the time, I was in the woods across our street from where I lived. I was about a half mile into the woods, by a river. I was making a video for my YouTube channel about primitive trap building for catching fish. By then, it was beginning to get dark, which didn't bother me in the least. But I could no longer get good footage of what I was trying to accomplish, so I decided it was time to head back. As I walked back, I always walked very quietly, something that I do instinctually so I'm unnoticed by any wildlife that I may want to sneak up on or possibly avoid. I've heard rumors of mountain lions and black bears, not to mention the million coyotes that are out here. So even though I'm unafraid, I am cautious, and I'm very vigilant. As I walked back off the trail, I began to get this strange, eerie feeling. A sensation like something was wrong. Whenever this happens, a place that you're so familiar with can instantly become so alien. Immediately, I stopped and quickly surveyed my surroundings. I know this area very well, and I also know that no one else is ever out here. Honestly, for anyone else to be out there, especially at this time late in the evening, would be rather weird. If someone stumbled across me out there, they'd probably also think it's weird, but to me, these are my woods. Suddenly, very close by, I heard a loud whistle. This wasn't a regular whistle. It was almost done in a kind of very short melody, maybe 3 or 4 whistle syllables, if that makes sense to you. It instantly suggested to me that it was not some kind of bird or animal or even a Bigfoot, but a person. Someone else was out there. The idea of it being another person, or something of human-level intelligence, spooked me. Without a second thought, I sprinted as fast as I could. I take pride in how quickly I can traverse obstacles and move through the woods with ease. I held nothing back then as I ran. At the same time, I listened closely, waiting for the telltale sound that something was following me. After a minute, I became curious, so I stopped and got down low, listening and searching in every direction. There was nothing, just eerie silence, the bad kind of silence. As I listened and watched, my blood ran cold when the whistle suddenly came again. It wasn't the whistle that scared me. What terrified me was the realization that I'd gained 0 distance between me and whatever the heck was making that noise. Whatever it was had kept pace with me, all while staying perfectly quiet and undetectable. Terrified, I didn't waste half a second. I exploded into a run. I was no longer confident in my ability to outrun this thing in the woods. I ran and ran, no longer caring if I made any noise. It took me no time at all to finally reach the road, but at the same time it felt like forever. There was a moment that I even thought somehow I'd stupidly run in the wrong direction, but I was in luck, and before I knew it, I was stumbling out onto the road, running up into our driveway to the safety of our property. I stopped halfway up the driveway, breathing heavily. I turned and just stared at the woods, scanning for any sign of movement, listening for even the slightest noise. But there was nothing at all. I didn't wait too long, though. I still had that awful feeling inside me, so I quickly sped inside and told everyone what had just happened. While they did believe my story, they didn't take it as seriously as I did. Long story short, I stayed away from that neck of the woods for quite a while, and I filmed my videos elsewhere. Always remember, no noise is made for no reason. Half a Jaw, from the Goth Mistress 13. When I was younger, I lived in a mobile home park in Springfield, Illinois. My home was at the back of the park along the woodline, so I'd constantly hike and play in the woods. When I say constantly, I mean that I would disappear into the woods when I got out of school, and my parents would have to call me on my cell phone to get me to come home, as I couldn't hear them with how far away I'd gotten. One day in early winter, I was on one of my normal hikes. The brook in the forest was pretty low, so I could see the bed of it. I was on the other side and the water was still kind of high in the middle. I made my way to a downed tree that allowed me to cross to the other side. I walked back to the spot where it was the lowest, and I climbed down. As I walked around the brook bed, I noticed something white sticking out of the rocks and sand. I pulled my gloves from my backpack and slowly dug whatever it was out. When I pulled it up, it's like the woods got silent. I was shocked at what I found. It was half a jaw, pure white and smooth as glass. I could tell in my 13-year-old mind that it was old, just because of how low the brook was and how deep it had been buried. It had to have been there for a long time. I ran my gloved fingers over the once serrated teeth that were still intact in the jawbone. They were still sharp, but not like they had been, I would guess. I rinsed it off in the water of the brook and looked at it closer. I didn't know much about bones or animals, but I knew whatever it was a predator. That's when I realized it had started to snow. The woods were still, quiet, and looked even creepier with all the leaves gone from the tree branches. I made my mind up to head home then, so I wrapped up my creepy new object in a towel that I carried with me in case I got hurt and shoved it into my bag. As I climbed up the embankment, something felt off. It had me thinking that the woods had gone silent because there was something in it that shouldn't be there. I jogged to the tree bridge, climbing across it, and as I was halfway across, I heard a twig snap, and all the birds that had been staying quiet flew away from the trees in a panic. The sound had come from the side I just left. I got scared. It was too early in the season for hunters to be out, plus it was illegal to hunt in these woods. I crawled faster across the tree, and I made it to the side closer to my house. As I stood up, I scanned the other side of the woods, looking for anything out of place, but I found nothing. I walked another 20 minutes before making it back to the fence line of my home. I jumped it and I ran inside, the silence seeming to follow me to my home from the woods. My father was sitting in his chair where he had been watching TV before taking a light nap with my cat baby on his chest. I tapped him and reached into my bag, pulling out the towel and handing it to him. He looked at me curiously and unwrapped the towel from around the jawbone. His eyes grew wide and he sat up, my cat jumping off of him and running to the back of the house where my mother was. "Where did you get this?" my father asked. "I found it in the woods while I was hiking. It looked weird, so I brought it back," I responded, a little worried because of his reaction. He got up and went out to the porch that overlooked the woods and just stood there, like he was waiting for something, watching for something. After about 10 minutes, he came back in and told me to never cross to the other side of those woods ever again. He said it wasn't safe. He added that he had only ever walked on our side, so if he had to look for me, he wouldn't know where to go if I was past the brook. He never gave me the jaw back, and never told me what it was. I'm 24 now, and I still don't understand why he looked so scared and how he knew I'd gotten it from the other side of the brook. I never told him that part. I wish I had a picture to show, but it disappeared the day I found it. Goblin creature attacked my dog. From William F. This is quite possibly the most intense and strangest encounter I've ever had. Not only did it happen to me, but also my dog and my friend's dog too. In our local woods, there is a path beside a cliff face, and on those cliffs are a series of small caves that we call the banana caves. I was never sure why they were called that, but if I had to guess, it's because they were made of limestone and had a slight yellow tint to them. Maybe it was the shape of the caves, but that's not really important. The path we walked was frequently walked by many people. Locals, dog walkers like us, bird watchers, you name it. It's not exactly a quiet path, which is why this was as shocking as it was. My dog and my friend's dog are great, and they're amazing off their leashes. They just go and do what they need to do and don't bother anyone or any other dogs. Of course, dogs will be dogs. Mine being a bit of an adventurer, it began climbing the bank that day toward the cliff face and near the caves. I tried to call him back down more than once. At one point, I called him again, but something had caught his eye. His head went real low to the ground, and his ears went straight back. I thought this was strange, because if it was a rabbit or a squirrel, he would have just chased it. But no, he stood as still as a statue. I shouted louder this time for him to come back down the path. Then there was a huge commotion. He went into fight mode. He backed up while barking and snapping at whatever the heck it was. I began to climb the bank myself in a panic, making sure it wasn't a badger or worse. My dog charged forward, and that was it. He yelped and barked, and it was awful. What I saw was this monkey-like creature with pointed ears. It had no fur at all that I could see. It was black and leathery, with black eyes. It had latched onto my dog's neck, hanging onto it, like the way a sloth would do to a tree or a caretaker. My dog shook and rolled fiercely, but this thing just held on. It felt like ages before I finally reached my dog. I'd been running as fast as I could up the bank. My friend's dog joined in on the commotion as she ran past me and began barking and snarling at this creature and my dog. As I got closer, I picked up a stick and instantly swung at the little creature, terrified it was seriously hurting my dog. I hit the thing directly in the back of its head, but it didn't budge straight away, so I hit it again, and this time I cracked it against its back. The creature then jumped off my dog, just like you'd imagine a monkey would. I got a look at it again and noticed it had a bat-looking face with 2 sharp front teeth. It did this little spin and looked like it tripped sort of, but eventually it dashed off on all 4s, climbing up the cliff face and disappearing over the cliff edge. Luckily, my dog was pretty much unharmed. He had a slight cut above his eye, a cut on his nose, and a cut on his chest that looked worse than what it was. There was just a lot of blood. I have no idea what this thing was, but my friend saw it too from the bottom of the bank and confirmed the exact same thing I saw. I believe it to be a goblin of some sort. Otherwise, I have no idea. If you have any idea, please enlighten me. I'd love to find out more. I live in the northeast of England, if that helps. The Little Girl in the Woods, from Wes M. This story happened when I was a teenager in Michigan. I grew up in a rather affluent town of about 50,000 people. The town consisted of seemingly endless suburbs, with no real downtown or business district. I lived on the north end of town, in a subdivision that backed up to a large wooded area of probably about 100 acres. The woods were surrounded by other subdivisions with an elementary school on the south end of the woods, which sat on a main road. My house sat on the west side of the woods, with the backyard facing east into the woodline, which was no more than 30 yards away from my back door. One sunny afternoon in late spring, I was helping my mother with chores around the house. It was early evening at that point, and the sun had just begun its descent to the horizon. I was helping my mother clean the kitchen and the sunroom, which were on the back of the house. Between the kitchen and the sunroom was a wall of large windows, which gave an uninterrupted view into the backyard and the woodline. For some time during the busyness of cleaning and organizing, I kept seeing strange movement in the backyard out of the corner of my eyes. It seemed like black shadows were moving around outside the house and the yard, but not coming anywhere near the deck and the house itself. Every time I looked up, nothing was actually there. I chalked it up to seeing shadows of birds flying overhead, or my eyes being overly sensitive to squirrels running around. Out there, we had no shortage of wildlife that inhabited the yard and the woods. And even though we were in the suburbs, it wasn't uncommon to see families of deer walking around and looking to snack on someone's expensive landscaping. My mother asked me to grab one of the cleaning supplies from the sunroom on the south end of the house. I walked across the kitchen into the sunroom and grabbed the item, and I began my walk back to the kitchen island where she was. As I walked, I again saw something move out of the corner of my eye to my right in the backyard. Reflexively, I glanced into the yard, not expecting to see anything more than a small animal jumping around and enjoying the sunshine. But what I saw made all the hair on my body stand on end. Standing just outside the edge of the woods was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. She was wearing a purple and pink checkered dress with a purple sweater, and her strawberry blonde hair was tied back. She was holding a teddy bear in her hands, but she wasn't holding the bear like she was hugging it or playing with it. She held it so it was facing out to me, directly in the center of her body, with her hands on either side of the bear underneath its arms. It was a rather large bear, about the size of her torso. I saw all of this in a split second. I looked away without really realizing what I saw. I took one more step before it clicked in my head that I'd just seen a human and not an animal in the yard. I snapped my head back as I froze in place mid-stride and stared out the window. But the girl was gone. My mother saw me stop and asked if I was all right. Apparently, I had a frightened look on my face. I'd gone relatively pale, and my hair was standing up. I didn't reply, and I just kept staring at the window, looking out into the woods, almost hoping to see that girl again. I started to think I was crazy. How could a little girl have been standing there 1 second, and the next second she was just gone? Was she the shadow I'd been seeing out of the corner of my vision all this time? My mom grew concerned and walked over to me, again asking me if I was okay. I answered I was, in a soft and confused voice. I didn't know what to make of what happened. My mother seemed worried now and asked me to explain to her what I was looking at. I told her what I saw and how the girl simply disappeared. The look of shock on her face almost scared me more than seeing the girl herself. My mother is a huge chicken and has always told me to stay away from anything paranormal related, even forbidding me from watching shows like Ghost Hunters. I looked away from the window to my mother, who had herself turned white. I looked back out the window and still nothing was there, but I could swear that what I'd seen was real. To this day, it still confuses me. This is the only paranormal encounter I've had in my life, and while I'm somewhat a skeptic of all things cryptid and paranormal, a large part of me believes I actually saw that little girl standing there in the woods that day. Thank you for listening to another unsettling episode of Unexplained Encounters. You can send us your story to have it narrated on the show at darkstories.org. Unexplained Encounters is an EerieCast original series. You can find other horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com, such as Redwood Bureau, a fictional anthology series, Freaky Folklore, a documentary-style series about myths and cryptids around the world, Destination Terror, a show about the most haunted places, and Tales from the Break Room, another show I host all about the scary things that happen to people at work. Again, that's EerieCast.com. By the way, if you want fewer annoying ads and you want to support what we do, consider going to EerieCast.com/plus to sign up for EerieCast Plus. That unlocks all our podcasts with all but host-read ads removed. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.